Hello and welcome to THF Conversations. My name is Kate Morland and I'm the Senior Manager of Museum Programs and Exhibits at the Henry Ford. Today we'll be discussing Heroes and Villains, the Art of the Disney Costume, a traveling exhibit that will be on display in Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation now through January 1st of 2023. This exhibition explores nearly 6 decades of films produced by the Walt Disney Studios, Walt Disney Television, and Disney Theatrical Group in an effort to share with guests the level of craftsmanship and artistry required to produce every costume presented across stage and screen. 79 costumes from 32 films, and it also represents 24 different designers worn by 71 actors. Heroes and Villains, the Art of the Disney Costume will prove to be a really unique and magical experience for guests of all ages. It's been open throughout the summer to great reception, and we're looking forward to a great fall and holiday season. So just some of the highlights that are in the exhibit, if you haven't had the chance to see it yet, are dresses from the 101 Dalmatians movie in 1996. We have Cruella de Vil. We have Cinderella's 2015 blue ball gown, Mary Poppins, the 1964 version traveling dress, as well as the more contemporary version. And then appropriate to this time of year, we have the Sanderson sisters dresses from Hocus Pocus. So through the process of hosting Heroes and Villains, our team at the Henry Ford has had the privilege to work closely with the staff of the Walt Disney Archives. And today we're able to welcome 3 of them into our conversation. Matthew Adams is Manager of Exhibitions, Joanna Pratt is Director of Operations and Business Strategy, and Rebecca Cline is the Director of the Walt Disney Archives. Matthew, Joanna, and Becky, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, we have some questions prepared, so we'll go through and just have a really great conversation today. So the first one that I've been wondering is, what are the origins of this exhibit? Specifically, how did you decide to focus on the element of heroes and villains?
Well, this exhibit actually showcased at our 2019 D23 Expo. And the origins came from an employee that we had on the exhibitions team who was just surrounded by thousands of the amazing costumes that we have. We've never done a costume exhibit, and it was just time to break them out and share it with our fans. Disney's all about storytelling. So what is the best way to showcase these costumes? And we thought showing heroes and villains and the anti-heroes and the spaces in between. And there was just the story that made sense and the story that we thought the fans would really enjoy.
Now, when you walk through the exhibit, there's a really clear differentiation between the heroes on the right and the villains on the left, and then the anti-heroes are offset too. So I love the way that you have created that exhibit, that it's very clear. Do you think that there are any key elements of the costumes in the exhibit that specifically highlight whether the character is a hero or a villain?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the choices that are made by the costume designers, there's a limited palette for them. There's color, there's fabric, there's textures, there's accessories, things like that. And this exhibit is not just about the costumes, it's about the design of the costumes and the choices the costume designers have made and what those choices say about the characters. So you see so many characters in films and you hear the words that are coming out of their mouth, but especially in the case of anti-heroes, they're not always saying what they really mean, or they may say one thing and be doing another, whether it's good or bad. True villains usually are pretty villainous, and you can tell that they're villains by the colors that they wear. In the case of Maleficent, she's all in black and she's got horns. I mean, it's obvious she's a villain. But in other instances, you don't really know a very good-looking or charming man in a pressed suit, can end up being a villain, and you don't know that. So it's a really interesting take that we can look at all of these costumes and separate them out into the archetypes of these characters, and you can celebrate them that way. But I really think that the anti-heroes in the middle are the most interesting, because you might find little clues in their costume as to whether they're really a good guy or a bad guy, and that's always fun to me.
Oh, that's really fascinating. That's fascinating. There's so many iconic characters that are in the exhibit. Um, why do you think that is, and what role does costuming play in a character being so iconic?
Well, in this particular exhibit, in these particular selection of costumes, they are archetypal in many reasons, because a lot of Disney stories are based in fairy tales and folk tales and things like that. And so these are archetypal characters. There's the bride, or there's the princess, and then there's the Wicked Witch and things like that. And so those are iconic characters, and Disney is full of stories like that. Not all of our stories have those characters, but this particular exhibit showcases characters that fit into that mold. And sometimes, like I said, it's really easy to tell if it's a good guy or a bad guy. But I think that the chore of the costume designer is how do you make the costume fit the character, and then let the actor inhabit it, and how it adds to their creation of a character.
When you were saying that, I was thinking of the Cinderella workshop area, that you can see so many different iterations of that character, depending on the choices that the designers made. And the wonderful video that was produced to go along with that section talks about the artistry and also the character. And with the programming that we've been doing to go along with this exhibit, we've focused on character and on craft, taking after what you've done with the exhibit. What role do you think costumes play in the popularity of a character and their overall story?
That's a really interesting question, because I think if you do your job right, if the costume designer and the lighting designer and the prop designer and the director and the actor all work together really well, it's kind of a seamless thing. You may see a beautiful dress and go, wow, I think that's gorgeous, but it's when you don't realize that, when you notice the costumes separately, it doesn't meld together. So I think what's really important is that the costumes play a part in the overall story that makes you believe the world you're entering. So if it's a period piece or a fantasy piece or something like that, I think that's really important to the story, is that it doesn't pull you out of the story to look at it and say, oh, that's wrong, or oh, isn't that a beautiful costume, and then you're not paying attention to the actor or to the storyline. So I think it's important that they all work together and don't stand out. But then in some instances, there's a costume that's meant to stand out. And you talk about Cinderella, that the transformation of from rags to a ball gown is so important to that story, and telling that element of the story. That's the costumer's job. You have beautiful lighting and effects and all that, but it's the costume. And so I think it can go both ways. It can be, don't notice it because you want to believe the character, but then in other instances, it's like, this is an important part of the story. Notice it.
I see so many people in the exhibit seeming to notice things for the first time. Particularly, I think, because Disney does such a great job with the immersive setting and with the storytelling. And so sometimes, as you say, the costuming goes along with that so well. And I love that this exhibit is presented on a blank background, or an nearly blank background, so that the costumes themselves are really what shines. So I think that was a wonderful choice on your part.
Thanks.
So for guests visiting the exhibit, what are some surprises or elements that you think that they should know about that they might otherwise miss?
I would say you already mentioned that video in Cinderella's workshop, and I would say that's probably something you don't want to miss. I'd say a lot of times in exhibits like this, these media pieces kind of get glossed over because there's so much other eye candy to look at. There's this costume here and that costume there, and of course it draws your eye to it. But this media piece has so much great content in it that, with these interviews with the designers talking about their process and what went into the design, which is really critical to the overall narrative that we're trying to tell for this exhibit. So I think you don't want to miss that, and not just gloss over it because there's all this star-studded costumes that you can see, which are great as well. But I would say that's probably the number one don't miss thing for me.
I agree.
that does really add to the experience. It adds that additional element. And you can hear the music from the film right as you're coming in and even into the rest of the exhibit. So it provides that a little bit of immersion on an audio level. So a lot of our staff have been thinking that working at the Disney Archives must be amazing. So would you be able to tell us just a little bit of background on the archives? What does it contain? How do you go about choosing what is preserved, and anything else you might want to say about the Walt Disney Archives?
Sure. The archive started in 1970, and so we are in our 52nd year now. And so there's a lot of different ways that we select what goes into the archives. It started out as mostly a document collection and a traditional archive. But over the years, it's grown. And as the company has grown, which it has tremendously since the 1970s, the company keeps getting bigger. And so we have to keep spreading our outreach and looking out into other areas that we didn't start with. And one of the things was in 2006, the archives moved into a new era. We moved under a different group within the studio, and it was really interesting because they had a new direction for us, and they wanted us to go out and start sharing these things with the world. And the archives mission has always been to protect and preserve the treasures and histories of the Walt Disney Company. But we got a new direction to reach out to the public and start showing these things. I firmly believe that these are all great things to have, but if only a few people get to see them and use them and share them, why have them? And so what we wanted to do was do outreach to our fans, and we have more fans, I think, than any other company in the world. It's a huge fan base of people who just love Disney. They love our movies and our parks and everything about Disney. And so that was our new direction, was to start gathering materials into the archives that we could share. And of course, an exhibitions program was one of the main things that they wanted to do. So we started in 2007. I think we had about 15 costumes in our collection. Mm-hmm. We had one rack of, and don't get me wrong, they were really iconic things like, Mary Poppins traveling dress and Zorro's costume and Davy Crockett's, raccoon skin cap and things like that. They were important pieces, but there weren't very many of them. And so we went out and we started scouring the company and making, plans and processes with all divisions of the company to get right of first refusal on what was wrapped from a film. And so now we have a process where when a film or an attraction, gets reimagined, those things, they call us and say, what do you want from this movie? What do you want from this TV show? And so now we have first choice. And so we pick the things that are the most iconic and that we want to share with the public through exhibitions or publishing or whatever.
And what pieces would make sense to exhibit? Well, it's going to tell the best story.
Right.
And I think the first exhibit we did was at the 2009, the very first D23 Expo. And the fandom and the fans' reaction to Walt Disney Archives exhibit was very emotional. It's something that I think they've been wanting. Our fans, especially D23 fans, have been wanting. So at every expo, our exhibits are also getting bigger. And the fans love it. So we're happy to do it for them.
Yeah, it's always one of the most popular things at the expo is our exhibits. And then these exhibits get translated into touring, which is exactly what happened with Heroes and Villains, is that it was so successful on the show floor at the expo that we then decided to start traveling it around the country so that other people could see it.
I'm so very glad that you did and that you've been preserving costumes and that comparatively later date into the 21st century of when those costumes started getting systematically preserved kind of explains the years that we have in the exhibit. These are mostly more recent films, with the exception, of course, of Mary Poppins and a couple of others. So that really helps to provide a good background about when you started preserving costumes within the time period of the archives itself. Right. And also museums in general have just been more focused on exhibition and on education in recent years and just preserving and protecting. I think a lot of us have a similar story, although it sounds like some museums that happened earlier in our life cycles.
Yeah.
that's with Fox, with the acquisition of Fox, we were actually, we brought in thousands of their costumes into our collection. And a lot of their costumes are earlier than what we have from
Right.
Disney.
Right. So now we have things that go back to the 20s and 30s, where Disney didn't start making live action movies in earnest or in a concerted way until the 1950s. We made a few that were mixtures of animation and live action, but we didn't start making animated live action films until the 50s. But Fox goes all the way back to the 20s.
Oh, wow. And I think I remember you saying when you were here that when Disney did first start making live action films, most of those costumes were not preserved. Is that right?
Right. Right. They were it's called built for hire, and the tradition within movie companies was usually to hire an outside company like Western Costume or different ones to actually build the costumes. And then the deal is that they got to keep the costumes. They got paid for the work, but a part of the payment was to keep the costumes so that they could rent them out to other productions perpetually after that. So most of the stuff from the 50s and 60s that Disney did went into this, went into that process and went back to the costumer and the costume company to keep. And so we didn't keep them here at the studio.
Seems just so different from how things are done today.
Yeah.
There's costumes from Hocus Pocus in the exhibit. And I must say those are probably the most popular ones. I see everybody getting their picture taken by the Sanderson sisters. And of course, the sequel was recently released. Were the archives used to help the designers create costumes for the sequels? And if so, how did they use those costumes?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, for Hocus Pocus 2, what may have been in the pandemic years, we took very detailed pictures of the costumes for the costume designers to recreate them for the sequel. But sequels and actually prequels as well. Saving Mr. Banks, they did a lot of research within the archives for costume, set decoration. But yes, we're regularly meeting with the studios so they can research for these remakes of our films.
Relationship that you have within the company.
It's great. We work with documentarians who are telling the stories about what things that actually happened, but then we also work with the filmmakers who create these new versions of some of our fairy tales and some of our earlier films that have sequels, like Mary Poppins Returns or Saving Mr. Banks, which is based on the original 1964 film. And so we get the opportunity to work with a lot of filmmakers and help them, in their efforts to make it as accurate as possible.
What do you hope visitors take away from this exhibit?
I'll let Matthew talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's really about a deeper appreciation for the art of costuming and really studying the details of that costumes. I think it's really easy to take this type of artistry for granted when you're watching film or television, because there's so much else going on and you're mainly focused on the story, the narrative. But the costumes support that narrative. So I think what this exhibit does is it really champions those unsung heroes from behind the camera that put in all of that work, all of that research into these costumes. So it's really just add to the richness of the character and support the narrative that the filmmakers are trying to tell anyway.
And I think about just appreciating all of the detail. I mean, we have a book. We have a book, right? It's just it's an opportunity to look very closely at all of the costumes and appreciate the details that these designers really thought of to include in these beautiful pieces.
Yeah, shameless plug. It's on Amazon. Art of Disney Costuming, the Walt Disney Archives. And it actually is, it was a book that we wrote, based on the Heroes and Villains exhibit. So it's the spaces in between, and most of the costumes in the exhibit are in the book.
That is a fabulous book. It's sitting on my desk too for reference. We also sell it in our gift shop. So you can get it from Amazon or from the Henry Ford when you come visit the exhibit. But
buy it there, not Amazon.
Another common question we get is, what is your favorite costume? So I can start first. I really like all of the Wrinkle in Time costumes.
Mhm.
That was one of my favorite books as a kid. And I think that those costumes just really elevated the characters. Mrs. Who, Mrs. What's-It, Mrs. Witch, and then of course Red, the villain, is it's a very bright costume, and it's not how I pictured him at all, but it
Yeah.
creates such a you wouldn't expect a villain to be wearing that type of happy looking outfit.
Sure.
So then I'll throw it over to the three of you. What are your favorite costumes?
I was going to say Maleficent because Maleficent is my all-time favorite villain,
Yeah.
but the Wrinkle in Time costumes are amazing.
They really
And
are.
I loved the movie, but every time I do see those costumes in the exhibit, it's those details. Every costume of the three women, those details are amazing. And you don't see them on screen.
Yeah.
You don't see them until you see the costume up close. But
That's spectacular.
so I'm gonna say those three and Maleficent, Angelina Jolie's Maleficent. Again, the details of the costume, it's beautiful, stunning. The jewelry, the scepter, the horns, it's just very dramatic with the train. I would say Maleficent.
What about you, Matthew?
You can lump me in with all the fans of the Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus, mainly out of just pure nostalgia, because that movie came out when I was probably, I don't know, 6, 7. So it was a really integral part of my childhood. So there's a huge nostalgia factor there. But to echo what Joanna was saying, the details that you can see up close, like on Winifred's costume, really unique alchemical symbols that are, emblematic of being a witch from that time period. So things like that you probably don't see, or you see it on screen, but it doesn't really register until you get to look at it up close. And I've already watched the sequel. I watched it on Friday when it was released, and I was grinning from ear to ear the whole time. So this is my plug.
Agreed.
My plug for Hocus Pocus 2 on Disney Plus. You need to watch it.
It's great to know that you're also a genuine Disney fan. It sounds like you're working in the right place.
Yeah. I don't want to admit this, but I was in college when that film came out, so I'm not going to even go there. But that does show, one thing when I talk about my favorite costume, because the first movie I ever saw was Mary Poppins, so that's my overall favorite Disney film. And having the traveling dress that Julie Andrews wore as Mary Poppins is really special to me. But I also really love the Emily Blunt costume that we display with it. And they tell you a story, just seeing the two side by side. It's really fascinating, because if you look at the Mary Poppins costume, it's very basic. There's not a lot of decorative element to the coat. It's a one color. It's a purple, and the skirt is one color with a little bit of white trim, and it has some detail, but it's very basic. And it's also very Edwardian. It takes place in 1910. And so, it's the silhouette of Mary has a longer skirt and the shoes from that period. And you can tell that that's the time period. Well, the sequel with Mary Poppins Return, they move it forward in time. So it's in the 1930s, and it's 20 years later. And even Mary has gotten a fresh look. And so I love the fact that the time period has shifted, but the essence of Mary is still the same. But if you look at that costume, it's much more decorative. If you look at the fabric, it's much more detailed. It's got a bit of a pattern in it. She still has her hat, but it's got a little feather, it's a little bird feather in it. But I love that costume. And because that tells another story, is that Mary Poppins was made in 1964. To see it, you had to watch it on a big screen. You couldn't see it on TV. You couldn't, watch it on a DVD or even stream it, of course. So it was very simple, very basic because of the technology. You look at Mary Poppins Returns, which was made for high def. So you have to have those details there that you didn't have to have 50 years ago, 60 years ago when you made a film. And so I think that tells a story about the technology of film and of costuming, and how those details now have to be there to make it look right, where it didn't have to have every little pattern and detail in the 60s. So it's really interesting to see those two side by side. So that's why they're my favorite.
I can see why after that explanation. The details are just so amazing. And every time I go in there, I take a look at a different costume and it just, wow. Matthew, Joanna, and Becky, it's been such an enlightening conversation that we've had today. It's always a pleasure working with you on this exhibit. It's Heroes and Villains, the Art of the Disney Costume. And thank you everyone for watching, and please come see the exhibit while it's still here. Again, it runs through January 1st of 2023.